The Wild Presidency of Andrew Jackson, a complicated legend. Andrew Jackson, war hero, duelist, self-made man, and the 7th President of the United States. Some call him a champion of democracy, others, a tyrant with a temper problem. Today, we're diving into the chaotic and fascinating ride that was Jackson's presidency. Without covering the Trail of Tears or Native American policy, that's a whole separate can of historical worms. Jackson was born in 1767 on the border of North and South Carolina. He grew up dirt poor, lost his whole family before adulthood, and hated the British with a personal passion, especially after a British officer slashed him across the face for refusing to shine his boots. He grew up angry, tough, and independent. He became a lawyer, a judge, and eventually a Tennessee congressman. And when he wasn't arguing law, he was fighting duels. Lots of duels. Jackson's real fame came from the War of 1812, specifically, the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. It was one of the most lopsided victories in American history. Jackson's forces were outnumbered nearly 2-1 by hardened British troops, including veterans who had defeated Napoleon. But Jackson had a plan. He used swamps, trenches, cotton bales, and whatever he could get his hands on to set up a strong defense. He also pulled together the most chaotic army the U.S. had ever seen: frontier militiamen, free black soldiers, Native American allies, French pirates led by Jean Lafitte, and even a handful of regular army troops. Somehow, it worked. When the British attacked, they were mowed down. Over 2,000 British casualties versus fewer than 100 American. Jackson became a national legend. And here's the kicker. The battle happened after the war was already over. The Treaty of Ghent had been signed weeks earlier, but news hadn't crossed the Atlantic. It didn't matter. Jackson's victory made him a household name and political rocket fuel. In 1824, Jackson ran for president and won, kind of. He got the most votes, both electoral and popular, but not a majority. The House of Representatives had to decide. Thanks to a backroom deal between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, Jackson lost. He called it a corrupt bargain, and so did most of the country. Jackson spent the next 4 years campaigning with a vengeance. In 1828, Jackson ran again, and this time he crushed it. His populist message and war hero status carried him to a landslide win. The campaign was ugly, though filled with personal attacks, especially against Jackson's wife, Rachel. She died just before the inauguration, and Jackson blamed his political enemies for the stress that killed her. He never forgave them. Jackson threw open the White House to the public after his inauguration. It turned into a madhouse. People trashed the place, stood on furniture, and got so rowdy the staff had to lure them outside with punch bowls. Welcome to the people's presidency. Jackson believed government should be run by the people, which in practice meant he fired a lot of federal workers and replaced them with his political allies. This became known as the spoils system. It made politics more democratic, but it also turned federal jobs into political prizes. Critics said it made the government unstable and corrupt. Jackson called it good old-fashioned democracy. Jackson's biggest political battle was with the Second Bank of the United States. He saw it as a tool for the wealthy to control the economy, and he hated it. When Congress tried to reauthorize the bank, Jackson vetoed it. Then he pulled federal funds and redistributed them to state banks, many of which were poorly managed. This caused wild speculation, inflation, and eventually a financial crash after Jackson left office. But to Jackson, destroying the bank was a victory for the common man. Congress even censured him for overreach, the first time that ever happened to a president. Jackson didn't care. He framed the censure and hung it on his wall like a trophy. In 1832, South Carolina tried to declare federal tariffs unconstitutional and refused to follow them. Jackson responded with threats of military force, and Congress passed a compromise tariff. He'd also got Congress to pass the force bill, authorizing him to use the army if needed. The message was clear: Jackson was president, and no state was going to ignore federal law on his watch. By the end of his second term, Jackson was so beloved by his supporters that someone gave him a giant wheel of cheese. We're talking 1,400 pounds of cheddar. Jackson didn't know what to do with it, so he put it in the White House lobby. 2 years later, just before leaving office, he held an open house and invited the public to come eat it. Thousands came. The cheese was gone in hours, but the smell lasted for weeks. His successor, Martin Van Buren, was reportedly not a fan of the lingering aroma of democracy. Jackson is also the first president to survive an assassination attempt. In 1835, a man pulled 2 pistols on him at point-blank range. Both misfired. Jackson's response? He charged the guy and beat him with his cane until others pulled him off. At the time, Jackson was nearly 70 and had already survived multiple gunshot wounds. Historians believe he carried at least 2 bullets in his body from old duels and fights. Some sources say more. He lived most of his life in constant pain and still walked like he owned every room he entered. Jackson left office with enormous popularity and enormous controversy. He expanded presidential power, shaped the Democratic Party, and became a symbol of frontier toughness and populist politics. But his legacy is complicated. His policies devastated Native American communities. He was a slave owner. He ruled with an iron fist and wasn't afraid to ignore norms or the Supreme Court. He's on the $20 bill, but whether he should stay there is still a hot topic. So that's Andrew Jackson, war hero, man of the people, and one of the most chaotic forces to ever sit in the Oval Office. In the next video, we'll tackle the darker side of his presidency, Indian removal, the Trail of Tears, and the human cost of manifest destiny. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss it.